The dawn of a new day. The sun had barely begun to rise over the sprawling cityscape, casting a golden hue over the busy streets of Lagos. Zoe, a woman whose hands were weathered by years of hard work, stirred from sleep. The dim light of the morning filtered in through the small window of her modest home. She had little time to waste. As the first rays of the sun kissed the earth, Zoe's day began, just like every day. The quiet hum of the city, still half asleep, would soon become a chorus of activity. She stretched her tired limbs and glanced at her son, Teo, who was still deep in sleep. Zoe smiled softly, her heart swelling with love. She had given up so much to ensure Teo had a chance at a future. The city had a way of eating people alive, but she wasn't going to let that happen to him. Not her son. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air as Zoe began preparing her small stall, arranging the beautiful handcrafted items she'd spent countless hours creating. Beads, fabrics, jewelry, each piece held a story, a labor of love meant to provide a life for Teo. She hadn't seen much of the world outside the tight streets of her city, but she dreamed of a better life for him, a life of opportunity and success, one he could reach for if he worked hard enough. Teo's journey. At the prestigious school that Teo attended, life was very different from the world he knew at home. His peers had private tutors, new clothes, and the latest gadgets. They spoke about trips abroad, vacations to places he could only dream of, and lived lives full of privilege. Teo, though exceptionally bright and hardworking, sometimes felt like a fish out of water. The gap between his humble background and the wealth of his classmates was a constant reminder that he wasn't quite the same as them. He excelled in his studies, earning respect from his teachers and fellow students, but the pressure was always there. He wanted nothing more than to make his mother proud. He saw the sacrifices she made every day to give him this opportunity. But even as he rose to the top in his studies, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. Something that his peers seemed to take for granted: wealth, privilege, and the ease of life that came with it. Despite his academic success, Teo often found himself sitting alone in the schoolyard, watching his classmates laugh and joke, their laughter echoing around him. He longed for connection, but it was hard when he felt like he didn't belong. Yet, his determination never wavered. Teo would not give up. Not when he knew that his mother's sacrifice was at stake. Tension and struggle. Back home, Zoe worked tirelessly, and Teo could see the toll it took on her. She would come home each evening with aching hands and tired eyes, but always with a smile for him. Her resilience was a silent strength that he admired, but it also made him feel helpless. He could never seem to help enough. Teo, focus on your studies, Zoe insisted one evening after a long day. You have a gift. Don't waste it. You can change your future, I know you can. But you must stay focused. Teo, sitting at the small dining table with a stack of books, looked up at his mother. But Mama, I want to help. I want to ease your burden. Zoe smiled gently, her eyes softening. She took a step closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. I am proud of you, Teo. Your education is everything. Don't worry about me. You are the future. All of my sacrifices, all the hard work, it will be worth it. I promise you. The words felt like a weight on his chest. He didn't feel like he could ever do enough. But seeing the fierce determination in his mother's eyes, Teo knew one thing for sure: he had to keep going. For her. For them both. The weight of words. The school's elite world. Every day at school felt like walking through a battlefield. Teo had learned to keep his head down, his books clutched tightly to his chest, as if they could shield him from the sharp words that constantly cut through the air. His classmates, particularly Jomo, made it a point to remind him of his place. Jomo, a wealthy boy with polished shoes and a smug smile, never missed an opportunity to mock Teo's worn-out clothes or the second-hand possessions he carried. Hey, Teo, Jomo called one morning, as Teo walked to his locker, his backpack slightly tattered from years of use. "Are you sure you want to be seen with that old bag? I thought you might be carrying something more respectable by now. Or do you not have the money for a new one?" Teo's face flushed, but he refused to look down. He clenched his jaw and kept walking. He knew that Jomo was just trying to provoke him, to put him in his place. But the taunts stung, each one a reminder that he was different, an outsider in a world that didn't understand his struggle. Still, Teo wouldn't let the words get to him. He was determined to rise above it all. He had a dream, a vision of a better life, not just for himself, but for his mother, too. He wasn't going to let the weight of judgment crush him. The conflict builds. Meanwhile, across the city, Zay's day was unfolding much the same way it had for years. Her stall in the crowded market was bustling with people, but it wasn't always easy. Zay had learned to smile through the discomfort, to ignore the harsh stares and cold remarks. Some customers, usually the wealthier ones, looked down at her as if she were beneath them. "Look at this woman," a woman in a designer outfit sneered one day as she passed Zay's stall, eyeing the handmade bags and jewelry with disdain. "How pathetic. Selling these cheap trinkets. Does she think anyone is going to buy this?" Zay's heart clenched, but she stood tall. The insult burned, but she refused to let it show. This was her life. This was how she made sure Teo had the chance to go to school, to have a better future. If these people couldn't understand her hustle, that was on them. Just as Zay was packing up some of her goods at the end of the day, a group of teenagers approached her stall, laughing amongst themselves. One of them, a young man with a cruel smile, pointed at Zay's worn hands. "Is this what you do for a living?" he mocked. "Do you really expect anyone to buy this garbage?" Zay's fingers twitched, but she held her ground. She met his gaze firmly, unshaken by the words that cut deep. "I work hard for my money, young man," she said calmly. "I don't expect anyone to buy my things. But I know that someone will." The teenagers chuckled, but Zay didn't flinch. She packed her things and stood tall, her pride intact. No one could take that from her. Strength in adversity. Later that night, when Teo returned home after another grueling day at school, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, her back straight and her eyes steady. It was clear that the world hadn't been kind to her that day, yet she didn't show it. She never did. Teo sat down beside her, his heart heavy with the weight of the taunts from his classmates. "Mama," he said quietly, "how do you do it? How do you keep going when people treat you like that?" Zay looked at her son, her expression softening. "I don't do it for them, Teo. I do it for you. And for the life I dream of for you. It doesn't matter how they see me. What matters is that I know my worth." Teo's throat tightened as he thought about the insults he faced at school, about the days when he wanted to crawl into a corner and disappear. But in that moment, looking at his mother's calm and unwavering resolve, something clicked inside him. He realized that strength wasn't found in avoiding adversity or hiding from it. Strength was found in standing tall, no matter how hard the world tried to knock you down. Zay's resilience had become his anchor. Every cruel word from his classmates, every taunt from Jomo, now felt smaller in comparison to the silent strength his mother displayed every day. Her example was the fire that burned in him, pushing him forward, reminding him that he was capable of overcoming whatever the world threw at him. "You've taught me well, Mama," Teo whispered, a new sense of determination rising within him. "I won't give up. I promise." Zay reached out and cupped his face, her fingers warm and firm. "I know you won't, my son. Because you carry my strength inside you. And that is more powerful than anything else." The silent struggles. The harder the struggle, the greater the victory. The walls of the elite school felt more like a prison to Teo each passing day. His classmates, those who were born into wealth and privilege, constantly reminded him of how different he was. Jomo and Obdi were the worst. They would often make cruel jokes, their laughter echoing down the hallways, as if they enjoyed reminding him of his place in the world. "Hey, Teo," Jomo called out one afternoon, as Teo walked into the cafeteria. "Did you get that second-hand sweater from a charity shop, or did your mom buy it from some bargain bin?" Obdi chimed in, "Oh, look, he brought his old lunch again. What's it today? Rice and beans. How quaint." Teo's stomach turned, but he forced a smile. His face betrayed none of the hurt he felt, the way his heart dropped every time they made fun of him. They didn't understand. They couldn't possibly understand the weight of poverty, the feeling of not being enough. Teo clenched his fist, his nails digging into his palms. He had to endure. He couldn't let them see how much it hurt. He never told his mother about the insult. She had enough to worry about. If he shared his struggles with her, Zoe would only be heartbroken, and Teo couldn't bear the thought of adding to her burdens. He didn't want her to see how much the words from his classmates had started to tear him apart. He would bear it in silence, pretending everything was fine, so that she could continue believing her sacrifices were worth it. Zoe's sacrifices. One evening, as Zoe prepared their modest dinner, Teo sat quietly at the kitchen table, lost in thought. Zoe noticed the distant look in his eyes and the way he hadn't touched his homework. She knew something was wrong even if he hadn't said anything. "Teo," she began gently, as she set a plate of food in front of him. "I can see something is bothering you. You know you can tell me anything, right?" Teo hesitated. He didn't want to burden her, to show her that he was struggling with everything that was happening at school. But there was a part of him, a small part, that needed to talk, that needed her to understand. "I'm just tired, Mama," he said quietly, his voice betraying his vulnerability. "Sometimes, it feels like I don't belong. I'm always different from the others. I'm not like them. I don't have what they have." Zoe's heart tightened, but she didn't show it. She had known this day would come, the day Teo would begin to feel the weight of being different, of standing out because of their circumstances. She sat down beside him, her presence warm and steady. "Teo," she said softly, "I understand how hard it must be. But you need to know something. Life will never be easy. There will always be people who try to make you feel small, to make you feel less than. But none of their words, none of their judgments, will ever change the fact that you are capable of greatness." She paused, her mind drifting back to the past, the years she had spent raising Teo alone after her husband had passed away. It hadn't been easy. She had lost so much, but she had never given up. She wouldn't. Not for him. "You are my strength, Teo," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "When your father passed away, it felt like my world had crumbled. But then I had you. And you were my reason to keep going. You are my light, my hope for a better future. And I've given everything I have, every ounce of my strength, to make sure you have the chance to succeed. Education is the key, Teo. That's the door to a better life. And I believe in you, always." Teo felt the warmth of her words seep into his soul, but the storm of doubt in his heart didn't fade. He nodded quietly, knowing deep down that his mother had never given up, not even when life had been unbearably difficult. Her sacrifices had always been for him, for his future. But despite the strength of her words, Teo couldn't escape the gnawing feeling of inadequacy that weighed him down. The secret pain. As the days passed, Teo tried to bury the pain he felt. At school, he continued to endure Jomo's taunts and Obdi's mocking laughter, but inside, he felt small, insignificant. He wasn't like the others. His family didn't have the money to buy new clothes or go on vacations, and he wasn't sure he'd ever measure up to the standards of his classmates. At home, he would smile and nod at his mother's encouragement, but inside, the shame festered. He didn't want to disappoint her, but sometimes, he couldn't help but feel that he wasn't good enough. His mother had given him everything, her love, her strength, and all of her sacrifices. But he wondered if it would ever be enough. Would it be enough to make her proud? Would it be enough to get him out of this cycle of poverty? Theo began to isolate himself, retreating further into his studies, trying to distract himself from the pain he couldn't escape. He didn't want his mother to see how much the judgment of others hurt him, how it made him feel like he was unworthy of everything she had given him. So he bottled it all up, keeping the weight of his silent struggles locked inside, hoping that one day, it would all be worth it. But no matter how much he tried to push the pain away, it lingered, a quiet ache in his chest that wouldn't go away. The secret pain of feeling like he wasn't enough was slowly chipping away at him, but he refused to let anyone see it. Not even Zoe. Because he knew, deep down, that if he gave in to the weight of it all, it would break the one thing that had kept him going, his mother's unwavering belief in him, the graduation day challenge. The big day. The day Theo had worked so hard for had finally arrived, graduation day. It was a day filled with promise, pride, and anticipation. The air was thick with excitement as Theo stood in front of the mirror, his graduation gown draped over his shoulders. Today, he wasn't just a student, he was the class speaker, chosen to represent the accomplishments of all his peers. The weight of the moment, however, brought a nervous tension to his chest. His classmates had always seen him as different, an outsider because of where he came from, but today, he would show them that he belonged here. Today, he would speak not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever struggled against the odds. But as the time approached, a nagging feeling gripped him. The expectations for perfection, the need to prove himself, threatened to overshadow the joy of the occasion. Across the city, Zoe was also preparing for the big day. After months of saving every extra penny she could muster, she had finally bought herself a new dress. It wasn't much, but it was her gift to herself, a token of pride for the sacrifices she had made and the dreams she had helped her son achieve. Today, she wanted to look her best, not for anyone else, but for Theo, to show him how much she believed in him, how proud she was of him. As she adjusted the dress and applied a light touch of makeup, she smiled at her reflection. Her heart swelled with love for her son. She had always been there for him, supporting him through every hardship. Today, he would take the stage, and she would be there, cheering him on. The unexpected encounter. The ceremony was being held at the grand hall of the school, filled with students, teachers, and their families. As Zoe made her way to the venue, she was filled with nervous excitement. She walked through the crowded streets, her steps purposeful, until she suddenly heard a familiar voice that made her stop in her tracks. Well, Jomo's voice rang out, dripping with sarcasm. Look at you, all dressed up for your son's big day. A real queen of the streets. Zoe's heart sank as she turned to face Jomo and Obdi, who were standing by the entrance to the hall, smirking at her. They looked her up and down, their eyes filled with disdain. I guess that's the best you can do, huh? Obdi added, laughing. You really think you fit in here with the rest of us? What a joke. Zoe stood tall, her shoulders squared, though her chest tightened. She knew their words weren't meant for her, but for Theo. They were trying to degrade her to make him feel small. She had endured countless insults over the years, but hearing them again, especially on this day, hurt more than ever. But she refused to let them see the pain. She took a deep breath and straightened her back. I may not have your privilege, she said quietly, but I'm here for my son. And I will always be proud of him. No matter what you think of me. Jomo and Obdi's laughter echoed in the air, but Zoe didn't flinch. She knew better than to let their cruelty define her. As she walked past them, she could feel the sting of their words, but she also felt the strength to keep moving forward. The turning point. Meanwhile, inside the hall, Theo sat in the front row, waiting for his turn to speak. His heart raced. He had always been a good student, but being the class speaker made everything feel different. The weight of his classmates' expectations, the need to deliver the perfect speech, made him feel as if he was about to suffocate. But then, as the ceremony unfolded, Theo caught sight of his mother, standing proudly near the back of the room. She had a warm smile on her face, though there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. Theo's chest tightened. He knew what she had endured, the mockery, the judgment, and yet, she never faltered. She had always been there for him, supporting him, even when the world tried to tear her down. That moment, seeing her strength, ignited something within him. The anger he had been holding inside, the anger at the injustice his mother had faced, surged up, unbidden. For the first time, he realized that the anger he had felt at school, the cruel words from his classmates, wasn't just about his own humiliation, it was about the pain his mother had endured. Theo's name was called, and he stood up, taking a deep breath. As he walked to the stage, his mind raced. The speech he had prepared no longer felt right. He couldn't stand there and pretend everything was perfect. He couldn't stay silent any longer. The moment he reached the podium, he looked out over the crowd. His eyes briefly met Jomo and Obdi's smug faces in the front row, and he felt a surge of resolve. He opened his mouth, but instead of reciting the words he had memorized, he spoke from his heart. I stand here today not just as a student, but as a son, Theo began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I am here because of the sacrifices of one woman, my mother. The room fell silent as Theo spoke, his words flowing with a passion he hadn't expected. I've heard people mock her. I've seen the way they look at her, the way they belittle her for working hard to give me the chance I have. But today, I want to tell you something. My mother is the strongest person I know. She's raised me on her own, worked day and night to make sure I had a future. And she's never asked for anything in return. His gaze locked on Jomo and Obdi. And as for those who think they can humiliate her, I have one thing to say, you are wrong. You will never know what it's like to give everything for someone you love. You will never know the strength it takes to keep going when the world tells you that you're not good enough. My mother taught me that. And that's why I am proud of who I am, proud of where I come from. Theo paused, feeling the weight of his words settle in the air. No one here gets to define me, or her, by their shallow judgments. My mother is the foundation of who I am, and she will always be the greatest person I know. A hush swept through the crowd. Theo could feel the tension in the air, but he stood firm, his voice unwavering. The truth was out now, and it would not be silenced. As he finished his speech, Theo looked over at his mother. She was standing at the back, her eyes wide with disbelief and pride. And in that moment, Theo knew he had done something far more important than give a speech. He had spoken the truth, not just for himself, but for his mother. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all, the courtroom confrontation. Seeking justice. The weeks following Theo's graduation were filled with a mix of emotions. The school had been abuzz ever since his powerful speech, with opinions sharply divided. Some students and teachers expressed their support for Theo and his mother, moved by the courage it took for Theo to speak out. But others, particularly those who had stood by Jomo and Obdi, dismissed the incident as a simple misunderstanding, a case of youthful indiscretion. Jomo and Obdi, never once to admit fault, continued to downplay the impact of their actions, even after Theo had spoken so openly about the years of mockery his mother had endured. They claimed that their behavior had been nothing more than harmless teasing, nothing to warrant such an outburst. The more they denied their responsibility, the more it hurt Theo and Zoe. It wasn't just a matter of words anymore. It was a matter of dignity, of standing up against the cruelty they had been subjected to. Zoe, who had remained quiet for so long, found herself unable to ignore the injustice any longer. The taunts had cut deep, and now, after all the years of swallowing her pride, it was time to take a stand. Teo agreed. Together, they decided to file a lawsuit against Jomo and Obdi for public humiliation and emotional distress. They were determined to hold the boys accountable for their actions, to show the world that bullying, no matter who you were or where you came from, would not be tolerated. The legal battle. The courtroom was a different world. Teo and Zoe, dressed in their best, sat nervously across from Jomo and Obdi, who were accompanied by their wealthy parents and an expensive lawyer. The contrast between the two sides could not have been more stark, the humble mother and son against the privileged boys and their families, each with their own version of the truth. Teo's lawyer, a passionate and experienced attorney, rose first to present their case. "Your Honor," she began, her voice firm and commanding, "what we are dealing with here is not a simple case of adolescent immaturity. The actions of the defendants went beyond careless teasing. They deliberately sought to humiliate my clients, Teo and his mother, Zoe. These boys have repeatedly mocked them, not just for their financial situation, but for who they are as people. They tried to make them feel less than, to diminish their worth in front of their peers." She paused, looking at Jomo and Obdi's parents before continuing. "We are here today not just for justice, but to send a message: bullying, especially public humiliation, will not be tolerated. Words have power, and when they are used to hurt, they leave scars." The courtroom was still, every eye focused on Teo's lawyer. She painted a picture of the long-standing emotional toll the harassment had taken on both Teo and his mother. She spoke about the deep shame Teo had carried, the weight of feeling like he didn't belong, and the pain Zoe had endured while trying to protect her son. When it was the defense's turn, Jomo and Obdi's lawyer took the floor, his tone smooth and measured. "Your Honor, we acknowledge that some of the words exchanged were harsh, but they were the result of youthful mistakes. Jomo and Obdi are both good boys, and this was never intended to be malicious. They did not set out to hurt anyone. They were simply acting out in the way that young people sometimes do." The lawyer continued, attempting to downplay the significance of the bullying. "This case has been blown out of proportion. While we understand that emotions are running high, the defendants should not be held to such severe standards for actions that were, at their core, a misunderstanding." Teo, sitting quietly in the courtroom, felt the sting of the defense's words. His stomach churned, and he fought to keep his composure. He had heard these kinds of justifications before, from classmates, from strangers, and now in this room. It was always the same. They tried to make it seem like their actions didn't matter, like the pain they caused wasn't real. But Teo knew the truth. The humiliation wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate effort to tear down the person his mother was, to break her spirit. The verdict. After hours of testimony and arguments from both sides, the judge finally gave his ruling. The room fell into a tense silence as the judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I have listened carefully to the arguments presented by both parties," the judge began, his voice steady and deliberate. "It is clear to me that there is no place for cruelty or bullying in any environment, whether in school or in society. The defendant's actions, though claimed to be youthful mistakes, were not just thoughtless jokes. They caused real emotional distress to the victims." The judge paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. "I find that Jomo and Obdi's behavior was deliberate in its intent to humiliate and degrade. It was a sustained campaign of mockery, not a single instance of youthful ignorance. Therefore, I am sentencing both defendants to community service, where they will be required to work with underprivileged communities to gain a deeper understanding of the struggles others face. Additionally, they will each be required to pay a fine to Teo and his mother, Zoe, as compensation for the emotional distress caused. There was a collective gasp in the courtroom. Teo felt a mixture of relief and vindication wash over him. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. The judge's decision sent a strong message: bullying and public humiliation were not acceptable, no matter the status of the perpetrator. Jomo and Obdi's parents looked stunned, but they didn't argue. The message had been sent loud and clear. The judge's verdict was a powerful reminder that no one, regardless of wealth or privilege, was above the law when it came to respect and human dignity. As Teo and Zoe left the courtroom, they exchanged a quiet, knowing glance. The legal battle had been long and difficult, but in the end, they had won more than just a case. They had won the right to be treated with dignity and respect. And most importantly, they had shown the world that no one, not even the privileged, could get away with tearing others down. A new beginning. The weeks following the courtroom verdict were a whirlwind of change for Teo and Zoe. Their lives, once defined by hardship and struggle, were now starting to shift. Teo's victory in court had brought him not just vindication but also newfound respect within his community. Word of his bravery in standing up for his mother spread quickly, and many in the neighborhood praised him for his resilience. As if that wasn't enough, Teo's academic achievements, which had always been impressive but often overshadowed by the difficulties he faced at school, now shone even brighter. With the support of his teachers and the attention that his speech had garnered, prestigious universities began to take notice. Scholarship offers flooded in, many from institutions Teo had once only dreamed of attending. He was on the path to a future that was entirely his own, one where his worth was measured by his abilities, not his background. For Zoe, the financial strain that had haunted her for years began to ease. With the legal victory behind them, she felt a sense of relief she had never known. She had always wanted more for herself and her son, and now, she could see the first steps toward making that a reality. With Teo by her side, Zoe opened a small cafe in their neighborhood. It was a modest start, but it was theirs. The cafe became a gathering spot for the community, a place filled with warmth and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods. Zoe's hands, once tired from the strain of selling crafts in the market, now had the joy of creating something new, something that was not only a source of income but a symbol of their hard-fought progress. Jomo and Obdi's apology. Months passed, and while life was slowly improving for Teo and Zoe, they hadn't forgotten the boys who had tried to break them. However, what neither of them expected was for Jomo and Obdi to reach out. It happened one afternoon when Teo and Zoe were busy at the cafe. The door opened, and in walked Jomo and Obdi, looking less sure of themselves than the arrogant young men they had once been. They stood awkwardly for a moment before Jomo spoke, his voice low and apologetic. "Teo, Zoe," he began, avoiding their gazes. We wanted to talk. We've been doing our community service, and it's been eye-opening. We were wrong. We were disrespectful, and we hurt you both, and we never should have done that." Obdi, standing beside him, nodded, his face flushed with regret. "We didn't understand what you were going through. We just thought you were different because you didn't have what we had. But now, seeing things from a different perspective, we were wrong. You didn't deserve any of that." Zoe looked at them, her gaze steady but cautious. She had come to understand the value of forgiveness, but she wasn't about to forget the pain they had caused. Still, she knew that healing could only come if they were willing to take responsibility for their actions. Teo stood silent for a moment, the memories of their cruel words still fresh in his mind. But he had learned, through his mother's strength, that holding on to anger would only chain him to the past. He took a deep breath and nodded. "We appreciate your apology," Teo said, his voice measured but sincere. "It's not easy to admit when you've been wrong. But it's the first step. We all have to do better. And I believe that you can." Zoe smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride for her son. Forgiveness isn't just for you, it's for us too. We are not holding on to that pain anymore. We are moving forward. Jomo and Obdi, though still uncomfortable, nodded in understanding. It wasn't easy, but it was a start, a chance for both sides to heal. The road to redemption wasn't a straight line, but they were taking the first steps. A hopeful future. The seasons changed, and with each passing day, Teo and Zoe's lives grew brighter. Teo continued to excel in his studies, now preparing for college with the full support of his mother, who was more confident than ever in her ability to build a future for them both. The cafe flourished, becoming a place of connection and hope, a symbol of what could be achieved through hard work and love. Jomo and Obdi, now aware of the consequences of their actions, began to forge their own paths toward empathy and respect. Though they still had much to learn, they were no longer the arrogant boys who had once mocked Teo and his mother. Their apology had marked the beginning of their own journey of change, one where they understood the power of kindness and respect, lessons they had once dismissed. As Teo and Zoe walked down the street one evening, their arms linked together, they looked out at the horizon. The future was no longer a source of fear but of hope. Their bond, forged through years of struggle and sacrifice, was stronger than ever. "We've come so far, Mama," Teo said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Look at us. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Zoe smiled, her eyes full of pride. "And I couldn't have done any of this without you, my son. We've made it together. And we will keep going, no matter what." As they continued down their new path, side by side, the road ahead looked brighter than it ever had before. Teo had found his place in the world, not by changing who he was, but by embracing it fully. And with his mother's unwavering love and strength guiding him, there was no limit to what they could accomplish together. In the end, the journey they had taken was not just one of overcoming obstacles, but one of transformation, both for themselves and for the people around them. The past, with all its pain, had shaped them, but it would not define them. They were writing a new story now, one filled with hope, redemption, and the promise of a better future.